Welcome to Sports Talk with Steve Jones, the daily talk show with the voice of Penn State football and men's basketball. You never know what special guest may stop on by any given day. Now here's the man of the hour, Mr. Steve Jones.
You didn't notice they were line painting on I-99?
I did not notice. Well, I noticed once I got onto 99 and saw the backup about 6 miles.
Have you ever heard alternate routes?
Alternate routes translation, the same idea everybody else has. You saved no time.
So, one time we're doing a pregame show. We used to do that roundtable pregame show with Joe, Stan Severin, George Paterno, John Grant, Gil Santos, and I. And we'd get about, let's say, 45 minutes with Joe. And we'd do it in a roundtable. It was Nelson Goldberg's idea. And really, it was a fun show to do. And Roger, trying to think, I think Roger ran the second year of it when he finally came on board. And we were doing the show at Cincinnati. So I was on the team plane. You know, it's easy for me. I'm on the team plane. We fly into Kentucky, and then, you know, because Cincinnati's airport's in Covington, Kentucky. And then you go across the river, you're in Cincinnati. And we're at the hotel. I remember it was a Clarion Hotel. And we go to sit down to do the show, and it's Gil, Stan, George, and myself. No John. Because John traveled out in an RV with some of his friends. And I said, okay. So we do the show. All right. No, we're done with the show. And there's a last segment that we do. Let's predict the score of the game. And, of course, Gil Santos is, you know, he's the lead guy, so he's the one running. And Gil's sense of humor was off the charts. You talk about quick. You know, you're twice a prince, he's secretary. I mean, it's like, it's the way it is. So, twice a prince was the one to finish second in the Belmont by 31 lanes. And Gil says, let's predict the score of today's game, our final segment. He says, we'll each give our prediction of the game, and since John's not here, we'll give you what John would say based on John's football knowledge. And, of course, and by the way, John had a ton of football knowledge, so please, I think to say I think the world of John Grant would be an understatement. Yeah. Okay, but so we go to do this. I'll go first. Gil, I'll go first. Penn State 45, Cincinnati nothing, and John would say Cincinnati 38, Penn State 3. So then he gets to me, all right? And I said, I'll say Penn State 38, Cincinnati 10. John would say Cincinnati 37, Penn State 1. And Gil looks up and goes, 1? He says, you can't get 1. I said, well, you said this was based on John's football knowledge, right? And so when we played it back on the air the next day at Riverfront Stadium, John looks over, he mouths the words, you essentially. Mm-hmm. It wasn't butthead, it was butthead. It was another word I can't say, right? And he did it with a smile on his face. Okay, so John was not mad at me. John has such a great sense of humor. Well, now we're done. Okay, and show's over. You know, the taping of it. Yeah. It's Friday night. I get out. Boom, John's in the lobby. He says, oh, God, I missed the show. He says, Steve, he said, got tied up in traffic, the whole deal. He says, oh, God. So he gets his key, and we get in the elevator. Joe gets in the elevator. He goes, John, missed you at the taping. Where were you? I was in an RV with some buddies who were driving into the game. You know, he said we got hung up in traffic outside of the amusement park. That's north of Cincinnati.
Yeah. Yep.
Right. What the heck's it called? Great Adventure or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. He says. Then there was more traffic around the city. And Joe looks at John and says, John, this is a big city. It's not State College. Right? Now, he's telling you this. You got to build in time when you do so. Right? Joe gets off the elevator. Right. Now, remember the next day, I was kidding around, and John laughed about it, but, in a kidding way, mouthed, right? He was like, what? So what is he talking about? He said, I know darn well what that. That kind of reminded me of you today. Where are you going?
Joe Paterno would have been very upset with me today. Yeah. I would never heard of leave it early, Lord.
Yes, he would have. Yes, he would have. Yeah. Rickwood Field, Birmingham. No, I did not get a chance to watch the game last night.
Saw a good bit of it.
Because I was speaking in Johnstown last night to the Laurel Highlands Penn State Club, and I had a great time. Awesome people. I mean, just awesome people. And I was listening to the game, some on the radio, and I had to laugh because the first 5 minutes I'm listening, and Andre Palante delivers. Well, Ollie's not sure. He's gone 5 2/3 so far. Ollie Marmol may take him out. Meanwhile, Pedro Pajes has gone down to the bullpen to catch one of the relief pitchers. We didn't quite know where literally the announcer said, we didn't quite know where the bullpen was, but he says, oh, by the way, he says, they're going to play the Giants in the next game of the series, and Jordan Hicks is going to be starting. And, Hicks, of course, played for the Cardinals. He loves St. Louis, but he's off to a great start with the Giants, the whole thing. In 5 minutes, I heard 4 State College Spikes names.
Nice.
Palante pitched here. He was the pitcher of the year. Pajes caught here.
Yeah.
Right? Ollie managed here. And Jordan Hicks on the 2016 championship team was one of the starting pitchers. I heard 4 of them in a span of 5 minutes. I thought, geez, that's the way it should be.
Absolutely.
Right? What they're doing right, what Major League Baseball's doing right now with this is. Now, I did get a chance to watch Reggie Jackson on the pregame show. It was off a tape. And Jackson teared up when talking about his Rickwood Field, Birmingham, Alabama experience. And he was asked by Alex Rodriguez, how emotional is it for you to come back to a place where you play with one of the greatest teams around? Okay, well, that's a nice, straightforward, benign, open-ended question, right? Now, remember, Jackson had been drafted by the then Kansas City A's, and so he was playing Double-A baseball with the Birmingham A's in 1967. Now, this is 1967. Okay, not 1947, not 1927. It's 1967. They played their home games at Rickwood Field. And Jackson was very straightforward about it. Coming back here is not easy. The racism when I played here, the difficulty of going through different places where we traveled. Fortunately, I had a manager and I had players on the team that helped me get through it, but I wouldn't wish it on anybody. I would say that I would never want to do it again. I walked into restaurants and they would point at me and they would say, the N-word can't eat here. I would then go to a hotel and they'd say, the N-word can't stay here. And by the way, this was all uncensored on Fox last night. Said, we went to Charlie Finley's Country Club for a welcome home dinner, and they pointed me out with the, quote, N-word. He can't come in here. Finley, to his credit, marched the entire team out. Right? Finally, they let me in there, and Finley said, forget it. We're going to go eat hamburgers. We'll go where we're wanted. Fortunately, I had a manager in Johnny McNamara that if I couldn't eat in a place, Nobody would eat. We'd get food to travel. If I couldn't stay in a hotel, they'd drive to the next hotel and find a place where I could stay. Had it not been for Raleigh Fingers, John McNamara, Dave Duncan, Joe and Susan Rudy, I slept on their couch 3-4 nights a week for a month and a half. Finally, they threatened that they'd burn the apartment complex down unless I got out. I wouldn't wish it on anybody. He went on to thank his family and friends and gave credit to those people for helping him, believing he would not have survived his time in Birmingham without them. I would have never made it. I also was too physically violent. He says, I was ready to physically fight. I'd have gotten killed here because I would have beaten someone's ass. And he said, you'd see me in an oak tree somewhere. And he's saying this all on the pregame show last night. And you're talking about something that, you're talking 6 years ago? 56 years ago. He's talking about, right? Yeah. 57 years ago. 57 years ago. And when Penn State played Auburn, it turned out that we stayed in Montgomery. And I always feel it's important to get around to history if I can. And Dick Girardi's great about that. Like Dick Girardi and I, when we did a basketball game in Alabama, see, sometimes you have more time in basketball. They were shooting around in Coleman. It's like it's like the fight. They just played the other night. I just saw a shoot around. Right. So we stay for the first half hour shoot around, and then we went over to Foster Hall, which is halfway between Coleman and Bryant-Denny Stadium. Well, why did we go to Foster Hall? That's where George Wallace stood in the door of Foster Hall and would not allow black student in. That's why we went there. Piece of history. So when we were in Montgomery, it turned out we got there so early that I had time to walk around the city. And I walked over to the minor league ballpark, But then I went to the Capitol area. I saw the first home used for Jefferson Davis as the president of the Confederacy. It's before they moved to Richmond. I went to the Freedom Riders Museum. I went to the Rosa Parks Museum. Right? Because you just wanted to learn, I just wanted to learn more about the time. Now, did I grow up in that time? Yes, but I grew up in that time in New England. I did not grow up in that time in the South. So everything I had as a reference point was TV. But you wanted to learn more about what was going on. Today is so exponentially different than then. Doesn't mean there isn't problems now, but it's way different than back then. And so when I see him talking about this, his own personal experience, right? This is not, I watched it. And this is not a man that's bitter at white people. He's bitter at the people that were there at that time. Sure. Because who did he give credit to? John McNamara.
Yeah. Charlie Finley.
Joe and Susan Rudy.
Dave Duncan.
Yeah. Well, they're not black, right? He talked about what it meant to them that they looked at him as a man.
Yeah. And
it was hard for him to play, and it's not just playing in Birmingham, it's the other places they played. And this is 1967.
Yeah.
This is, 3 years after the Civil Rights Act. Mm-hmm. This is years after Rosa Parks got on the bus. This is, right? Now, at this point, Dr. King was still alive in 1967. Dr. King was still alive. He was murdered a year later in Memphis. And it just reminds you of what people have gone through Right? And I don't care what the experience is. For example, we just celebrated, in a totally different realm, D-Day. It was the 80th anniversary of D-Day. And you can't have things become mythology, right? You need to listen to the Reggie Jacksons of the world as to what they went through, just as a reminder that you can never warp even a smidgen backwards, because that's what he lived through. And it's still emotional to him today. I mean, the pain he must have gone through. And, and then when you hear the veterans of D-Day, the boats opened up and all of a sudden, they're under fire. They're all wondering why they're still alive today. Right? It wasn't just the pain of you potentially getting killed, it's then seeing your buddy get killed. Or seeing and then asking yourself later, why did I survive? All right? And, other people's experience, you need to listen to what their experience is. You can learn a lot from it. I thought what Reggie Jackson did last night in what was a simple, open-ended, benign question by Alex Rodriguez, which is a perfect way to start any interview. You want to open up with something general and then listen to their answer? I mean, that was from the heart. It wasn't one of the, hey, it's great to be back. Oh, yeah, we had, I came up with great teammates and da-da-da-da. No, it was the opposite. All right? And you're like, okay. And guess what? I'm glad he said it.
Yeah, same. I think a lot of people are. Absolutely.
I'm glad he said it. It's an experience. In other words, it is an experience I did not know about.
No.
I'd never heard him tell that story before.
No, I knew the relationship with Bill Russell and Red Auerbach, what they went through. I without question.
In Boston. Yeah, it's terrible.
Absolutely terrible. Yeah, so absolutely knew that, but did not know at all. And we're talking with Russell, it was a different time. The Civil Rights Act was not passed.
That's right.
Prior to then. And now, you're talking about 3 years after it, with what Reggie Jackson had to go through. I did not know it at all either. Yeah, it was a learning experience for me in a big way.
Didn't know that. Right. I mean, I thought, most people, it was like a big deal to find out, what do you mean? He played in Kansas City first before Oakland? Yeah, it's like, I always thought he played for Oakland. And then you find out more about the guy. And it's, because remember, where's Reggie Jackson from? He's actually from Philadelphia.
Yeah.
People don't realize that he actually is a Philadelphia guy.
He is.
But, wow, that was rather powerful in looking at that today. Again, I did not see it myself last night. It wasn't until I saw it this morning. I went, oh, this will be interesting. And it's exponentially more interesting than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I was listening to the Cardinals broadcast last night. I'm like going, okay. Yeah.
I'm happy they do these games. I think obviously the Field of Dreams game's under construction, so you can't really have that for now. But I'm happy they do because look, and I think obviously the death of Willie Mays reminded a lot of people of it. Just the history, not only with what these guys went through, the history of the pastime of the game of baseball itself, I think, is lost nowadays. It's lost because the younger generation hasn't. We're now at that. We're past baby boomers. We're at that point where the generation Gen Z, I guess it would be, or Gen X, I guess it would be first, would really get out of the game of baseball a little bit because of what happened in the 90s. You had the player strike, obviously, and you had the steroid era without a doubt. But and now Gen Z and beyond is where, and millennials as a whole too, really, for the most part, they've gotten out of the game. And I think you forget about the history that it brought in the past time that it continued to give us for so many years. I think nights like last night, in a good way, and a little bit of a negative way, absolutely. But all of that brings together the history of a game that I think has fallen apart in a lot of ways for a number of reasons, through some fault of their own, through not as much fault of their own. But I think it's nights like last night and nights like the Field of Dreams game where the baseball fan especially and then that casual fan come together.
A Little League.
Yeah, and Little League, absolutely. There's no question. No question. Little League Classic. And yeah, they come together and see what the game is about, which I think can make fans, which is what they are at times are struggling to do. I think I've made this point a couple times. I think that huge advantage the NBA has is they reach that demographic. It is tough to reach that demographic nowadays, period. Right. Soccer reaches that demographic, not to the large extent in the U.S. that it does worldwide, but that demographic is almost impossible to reach in the game of baseball, and they reach it for a couple nights a year.
Sure.
And last night was one.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm going to talk with Gary Matthews. We'll put it on the next Thursday show. I'm going to talk to Gary Matthews about Willie Mays today. Yeah. Because Gary played with him with the Giants.
Giants, yeah.
So I'm going to talk with him today, as well as Bob Nightingale and Jody McDonald. You got to remember Jody Mack, his dad, Joe McDonald, by the way, still alive. Uh-huh. Joe's 94 now. Jody Mack, his dad, Joe, was integral with the Mets at the time they acquired Willie Mays. So I'm going to talk with him as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And, Kevin Burkhardt was a lucky guy last night. I think you look at what he sat next to, it was just remarkable.
Sure it was.
You have some of the greatest players that ever played the game lined up, one by one.
Yeah. So, it's so that was last night. It looks like J.J. Redick is going to be the
Plan B.
The coach of the Lakers. Carmelo Anthony said, quote, Kobe Bryant couldn't stand J.J. Redick.
No, he couldn't. No, he definitely couldn't.
Hated each other.
Hated him. Yeah.
Whoops.
Well, he also, he's going on and nothing against this guy. He's got a history of behavior, but he's reached out to Rondo as an assistant.
Great.
In Los Angeles. I'm looking at that thinking, man, I'm not so sure about that.
I don't know about that.
Now, this is a guy, talent.
Yeah.
One of the best point guards I saw in that era. Everything else, what you need to be as a coach. Yeah. He's got some learning, I think. And I think J.J. Redick may too. So it's an interesting hire, I think, in a lot of ways. But yeah, no, Kobe couldn't stand Matt Barnes. Kobe couldn't stand J.J. Redick.
Yeah.
Then there were probably a list of several other guys, but those were two very high at the top of the list.
Yeah. So, for anybody's wondering in the NBA about lack of head coaching experience, I give you Steve Kerr.
I give you Steve Kerr, but I give you another list of a couple guys that didn't make it too far.
Right, I know, but I'm saying he did.
Yeah.
I mean, Eric Spoelstra.
Spoelstra for the most part, yeah.
Right, he'd been mostly a film guy.
Yeah.
To that point.
Yep.
I mean, that's why, but that helps. So I got to talk to John Griffin at Bucknell. John was the film guy for the Indiana Pacers, I think.
Yeah.
But he became an assistant coach on the collegiate level, St. Joe's, so forth. Now he's the head coach at Bucknell. But he says the film thing really helped him. But how much experience did Jason Kidd have?
Very little, yeah.
Right? So it's an odd league when you don't need experience to do something.
No, I think they base it off of what you did on the floor a lot of times. Okay, I saw your talent. I saw you're one of the smartest players I coached. And I think that's a big part of it. You look at really Larry Bird when he was hired.
Yeah.
Same thing. Look what he did with the Pacers.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, one interesting story about Willie Mays, and there was a manager in the 60s named Herman Franks. Now, he had been a guy that had been mostly associated with Leo DeRocher. And, of course, early in May's career, Leo DeRocher was manager. And Franks was one of those guys that came in and he gave Mays as much latitude as possible. And they asked Herman Franks one day, why did he give Mays more latitude than anybody else? He says, because he knows more about those things than I do. He says, you have any hard questions? Well, Franks, unbeknownst to people, was actually a great investor. And Mays had struggled financially with some things. And because of Franks in helping Mays invest his money, Mays recovered financially. I mean, these are all like little stories because, they had fired Alvin Dark. Alvin Dark had split that clubhouse down the middle, right? And he had a revolt on his hands, especially with the Latin players. Like Orlando Cepeda wanted nothing to do with them. They wanted to get out. Mays ended up being the peacemaker while not talking to Dark once the last 2 months. He wouldn't talk to Dark the last 2 months of the season. Dark made some comments, in the press about certain things in the South and so forth that just were wrong. And Mays did not talk to him one time the last 2 months of the season, but Mays kept the team together because he was kind of like the go-between, and he kept a revolt from happening where a bunch of players were going to say, the heck with this, and they were going to leave. And the Giants ended up finishing in third place in that year. Well, they hired Franks. Well, Franks comes in, totally different thing. Hey, this dude knows how to play. He's awesome and incredible, whole thing. And at the same time, privately saying, hey, look, I heard you're going through some tough financial times. Let me give you a couple of ideas on investments. Let me help you out here. And I guess Franks was a wizard with it. And he got Mays back on track financially. Mays, on the other hand, had everything on track in 1965 as well. He was the MVP of the league. He hit 52 home runs. He hit his 500th career home run. He's the first guy since 1955 to hit 50 home runs in a season in the National League.
Yeah. In a very tough ballpark, too. I think that's the one thing that gets overlooked sometimes. Candlestick Park, these guys, that Bonds included. Bonds and Mays both, that home run total would have gone up had they not played in Candlestick.
Well, it should be pointed out, though, that was also the season of the John Roseboro, Juan Marichal, where Marichal took the bat to Roseboro. Like, ew, that was a bad one. Football has its final official recruiting weekend, coming up, in terms of mass visits for the recruiting weekend. It looks like the June 30th, as I mentioned, potential June 30th, that would start next year, not this year. Early signing periods going by the boards because it makes too much sense. And because it makes too much sense, the SEC doesn't want to do it.
I was going to say, certain people are against it. Yeah.
The SEC and Southern high school coaches are against it. I just think it's just an absolutely archaic, absurd, backwards thinking way of going about it. As I said yesterday, it is it goes against the common sense of it because I talk about the basketball signing day. It's the equivalent of putting that between the last regular season game and the start of the conference tournament. That's your early signing period? Really? Well, that's what football's doing.
Yeah.
That's what they're doing. Right? That makes no sense.
No.
It's not like they took away the late signing period. Yeah. Not like they took away the late signing period. It's still there. So you can put the early signing period at a point where it's convenient for both the high school player and for the high school coaches along the way, and the college coaches, I should say. It becomes way more convenient because they've made up their mind while still leaving a late signing period for those who just aren't ready to commit. That's fine. What is wrong with that? Nothing. But because there's a lot of common sense with it, they're not going to do it because the SEC, the SEC only has X amount of votes. Outvote them and move on.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay? That's what I do.
I would too.
Okay? Outvote them and move on. But they don't seem to want to buck that trend.
Yeah.
But now you get the J.J. Redick story. He's an interesting guy. He's very opinionated. He is also very well-spoken.
Well-spoken, yeah.
Which is always going to help his argument on anything. Anytime you have the ability to deliver an opinion and do it and be articulate about it, yeah, you can do that. The question is going to be whether he can coach and whether he can handle the personalities of this. It's one thing to sit there and give opinions and you don't agree with people's opinions on a show. It's another thing to be the head coach and have disagreements with players on opinions. So he's going to have to handle that. Now, he played in the league, so he saw it handled by other people along the way. But we'll find out. I mean, the Lakers just run through coaches like water at a
anymore.
Like water at a 10K, for goodness sakes.
You're right.
They just can't, they can't keep anybody. Well, Frank Vogel, he's a problem. Okay, Darwin Ham, he's the answer. Yeah. Now he's the problem. Maybe the problem is that you don't have enough good players around your best players.
Nope.
That could be a possibility.
And one of your best players can't stay on the court.
Yeah, and that's another issue. Basketball. Talk about the football part of it. We did talk about we talked about the weights yesterday, right?
Yeah.
And we were going through all the weights where they are, like Tony Rojas at 239, Drew Shelton's at 306. Katron Allen's 229. I think Nick is 227. I think Aller's down to 239, by the way. Oh. When I talked to Drew the other day, I thought he looked in great shape and really looked, like he looked trim. Remember that 239 pounds is spread over a 6'5" frame. It's an exciting time. I mean, they're really being. I was interviewed by the Johnstown Tribune Democrat the other day, and I think they're going to edit out the negative stuff I said about you.
Nice.
I was just emotional when they asked. That's all.
I'll tell you.
I was just emotional. And I said, look, it's a team that very much they're very businesslike. They've gone about their business. They're not taking the hype train and things like that. They're just going about their business because it's a long way to get there. What the heck is this? Oh, Tony. Okay. I'm producing the game at your place first week of September. Okay. All right. Tony DeSanti is one of the great producers out there. Let's see. Oh, okay. Okay. I get a lot of messages that are just a little different. Right. So, that's where they are. Football-wise, that's where they are. Basketball. I've been to basketball practice 3 times this week. Look, I can't tell anybody at this stage. I was asked this in Johnstown last night. I said, I can't tell anybody where I think they're going to place anymore because there's just so many different moving parts in sports. For example, Ohio State has Will Howard now a quarterback. Well, you want to know why Will Howard left Kansas State? You look confused. Okay, Will Howard's the quarterback?
Yeah, I think, yep. Guy for Ohio State, I do know that.
He was not going to be the starting quarterback at Kansas State. Avery Johnson.
Was going to be. Yeah,
Avery Johnson was going to be the starting quarterback at Kansas State, not Will Howard. It's interesting seeing him built up as people saying he's a Heisman Trophy candidate. Maybe he is. But this guy wasn't going to start at the previous place. So I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, I've seen him play in games before where I thought he really played well, like the Big 12 championship game against TCU, things like that. And I was impressed by what he did there. Showed a lot of guts with how he played. Didn't think for a moment he was a pro quarterback.
No, I don't. I still don't think so.
No, I'm just saying. And you don't have to be a pro quarterback. If you're a really good college quarterback, you're going to be fine. But I don't know how he's going. I don't know how he's going to play at Ohio State. He's got better personnel around him compared to Kansas State. There's no question about this. So you don't know. Same thing in basketball. I'm going to preface then I'll get to the point about Penn State. I don't know how they're going to place in this thing because, for example, out of nowhere, your schedule now has USC, UCLA on the road. You've got Oregon and Washington here. Well, they have never been on Penn State's schedule before. Oregon's never been on Penn State's schedule. Washington's never been on Penn State's schedule. USC was in a couple of tournaments with Penn State, right? They were down in that Charleston tournament. Penn State beat them down there, right? UCLA, they haven't played them since the 91 NCAA tournament. Yes, I did that game. So you don't know how that's going to play out. You have no idea. They've all changed personnel. Kobe Johnson was with USC. Now he's with UCLA. The kid that was the leading scorer at Penn last year is now at USC. I don't know. So that's why it begets to be, where do you think they're going to place? I don't know. Now let's get to this team. With that as the preface, that you just don't know because you're just not sure how other teams are going to play out yet. This team is exponentially better today than the team he had 1 year ago today. Right? Now, does that mean they're going to win 25 games? No. Does it mean they're going to win 15 games? No. I mean, I don't know. I can't tell. Only because part of it is you and part of it is them. Mm-hmm. And it's really hard for me to get a feel. When you have so many transfers, especially, it's really hard to get a feel on teams. It used to be you could get a real feel on teams based on returning personnel and so forth, because you at least have seen them. You know how they mesh together with other guys and so forth. I'll give you one. Michi Johnson. Michi Johnson reclassified, came into Ohio State starting in January. This is a couple of years ago. 17 years old. Right? Great prospect out of Cleveland. Right? And look, he looked like a 17-year-old kid trying to play college basketball. Again, so he transfers to South Carolina. Well, South Carolina, he gets better. Well, now he transfers back to Ohio State. But I don't know how he's going to fit in with Thornton. I don't know. Do you know? I have no idea who's going to fit in. I mean, I got to find out. I'm not sure. They don't have Jamison Battle anymore. Okay. They don't have Roddy Gale anymore. Okay. They don't have the big kid in the middle anymore, Akpara. They don't have him anymore. But they've got some other transfers that look like they're terrific players, but nobody knows how all the parts fit. Right? How good are the two freshmen going to be, Harper and the other kid at Rutgers? They're highly, highly regarded. Okay. Well, can they play in the same floor together? I don't know. Dusty Mays knew it at Michigan. Vlad Golden came with him from Florida Atlantic. All right, that helps. They've got a couple other transfers. The transfer thing is the part you don't know about. And Nebraska's a perfect example of that. Last year, Nebraska made the NCAA tournament. At the beginning of the season, I couldn't have told you in a million years whether Nebraska was any good. Then they let's see, I'm trying to think. The only game they lost in the non-con, I think, was Creighton. Right?
Yeah.
And then they picked up a big win in the non-con. We're like, okay. And then, of course, when they had the Purdue game, you're like, this is before they played Penn State, like, oh, man, they're pretty good, right? But you couldn't tell in December if they're any good because they had so many moving parts. I don't know. But in terms of looking at this Penn State team and its ability to compete, they'll compete with anybody. The 5 guys back helps. They know the system. The 4 freshmen, there's some talent there. There is some talent there. Right? And the transfers, talent there as well. So in terms of talent, and I think learning curve, compared to June 21st, 2023 to June 21st, 2024, Penn State basketball, based on what I've seen, is a much better product today than 1 year ago. Now, how does it play out? I'm not going to sit there and tell you how it's going to play out because I don't know. Oh, I forgot we're not supposed to do that in these shows. And I don't know because I've got to see people play games, right, along the way. I can't sit there and predict. Like let's take Indiana. They got the big kid from Arizona. They got the shooting guard from Washington State. I mean, they've got a lot of transfers coming in. I don't know. I mean, who knows? Remember last year? Kansas, number 1 team going into the season. We got Hunter Dickinson. A couple of other guys, right? Plus they had the great, Furphy, the shooting guard forward who's in the draft, Johnny Furphy. Is that who it is? He's going to be a lottery pick. We got this. We got Harris. We got and what happened with them? It didn't work. They actually lost games at Fog Allen Fieldhouse. Suddenly out of nowhere, those people in Lawrence would go to their cars and feel something they hadn't felt for years, depression. It's like, I haven't felt that way since I did it since 10 years ago at a Kansas football game. I mean, what do you mean they're losing? All right. And you can't tell these days. Okay, Miami. We've talked about Miami with NIL over and over and over again. Well, Miami got to the Final Four, and they had what I refer to as the $500,000 backcourt, Nigel Pack and Isaiah Wong. Okay. Well, last year, still the same NIL deals. Pack's still there. A year ago, what did Miami do? They didn't do anything. Right? They did nothing all last year. They were like, okay. You just can't tell anymore. College football has a lot of just can't tell either about how teams are going to be. And the transfer portal has created all that. It's not as simple as who do I have back, who did I recruit? It's who do I have back, who did I lose in the portal, and at what positions? Who did I gain in the portal? Oh, and by the way, who did I recruit? It's a more difficult puzzle to figure out these days. And the transfer portal has made it more difficult for everybody to figure out. And you always ask yourself when somebody transfers, why?
Absolutely.
And sometimes it's simple, right? Sometimes it's simple. You get into a system, you realize the system doesn't quite fit you, you're not getting enough playing time, and you're like, okay, all right? And you feel maybe your game's been set back. Okay. Now, I understand all that. All right. I never once mentioned NIL. Okay. But, and sometimes that's a great reason, or like, you know what? I'm sick of losing. Okay? That's legit. I'm sick of losing. I want to go someplace where I want to get to the NCAA tournament. I want to win. Right? It makes a difference. And then there's a case like Andrew Funk. Bucknell, for example, has limited graduate programs. Limited. They have some graduate programs, but they have limited number of graduate programs. Andrew was a great student. Well, so as a grad student, he really almost had to transfer if he wanted to keep playing. So he came down to Stanford, Penn State, and I guess Stanford didn't have what he wanted. All right? Well, he comes here, they had what he wanted, and of course, did it get him to the NBA? Yeah. He played with the Chicago Bulls at the end of the season as a two-way player with the Bulls. So there are all sorts of reasons why guys do it beyond what you would perceive to be selfish reasons. All right? Sometimes it's very like, okay, I'm kind of lost in the wilderness here. I need, I've got to recalibrate. Or they change coaches.
Yeah, that too.
They change coaches like, well, I didn't sign on for this. I didn't sign on for this guy. And you may sit there and guess what? I didn't sign on for this guy, but let's just see what he's like. And you find out, wow, he's great for me. You know what I mean? That happens too sometimes. It's not just that simple. They change coaches like, man, I'm really glad they changed. This worked out great. Or it's like, oh, man, this is not working for me. And so but it also has changed everything across the board. And, of course, now the schedule's changed because your 20-game Big Ten schedule, it now turns out that 20% of it is against schools that weren't in your conference a year ago. 4 out of the 20 games are going to be against teams like, I never played them. It's great. You don't know what the travel means.
Right.
You don't know what it's going to be like to, what the travel was going to mean for them. Hey, Oregon's going to come in and play. Let's just pick. I haven't seen, because we don't know what the order of the games happen to be. But if I saw the Oregon volleyball schedule, and they're doing combo trips. We're going to go to Michigan State. Then another weekend we're going to do Indiana, Purdue. Their grouping was Ohio State, Penn State. For road trips. So Oregon's going to play here in women's volleyball. So that gave me that's the tip-off that they're going to do it exactly the way you and I talked about, that they would do it in twos for the West Coast teams, and that the East Coast teams will go out there and they'll do it in twos. Right? If you have to play Oregon and Washington in a given year, you will out there, you will do it in one weekend. If you have to play USC, UCLA, you'll do it in a weekend. Based on the women's volleyball schedule, that's the tip-off that they're going to do exactly what we talked about. But, but there's just a lot of factors that go in. But if you're asking me if I think this team is a better team than 1 year ago today, no question. Now, how it plays out, I'm as anxious to find out as the rest of you. And then we'll see what the NCAA wants to do with the tournament beginning in 25, 26. As I said yesterday, look, just go to 76. The reason being, if they gave me a choice between 90, which is 25%, that was what that committee had thrown out there. I don't know if it was a recommendation, but it sounded like it was a recommendation. You asked me 90 or 76, I would say 76. Yeah. But if you tell me 72 or 76, I'd still say 76. You want to know why? I think you're going to do it anyway. Just get it over with. Do it now. Yeah. And because of the tightening of groups with no Pac-12, the power schools, the Power 4 schools, are going to want a few more at-large bids because you're losing at-large bids and an automatic bid because there's no Pac-12 anymore, right? And you're condensing everybody into 4 as opposed to having it spread out over 5. That changes the at-large bid structure. So they're going to want more at-large bids. Now, what would I say to the smaller schools? Right? Guess what? Right? You may have to play in a first 4 game, but guess what? Half of you are going to win, which means half of you can claim an NCAA tournament win. And I said that to Pat Flannery yesterday, and he looked at me and says, yeah, I didn't think about that way. I said, those schools can get an NCAA tournament win instead of trying to do it the UMBC way and beating a 1 seed.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, how old is that shirt?
This one has aged. Yep, this one has aged.
So you've had it a month?
No, a little more than a month. 2 months.
I forgot. You don't wash your stuff.
It wouldn't look like this if I didn't.
Glad you made it in.
That was a little bit of a challenge. Joe Paterno's yelling at me right now. I can feel it.
It's like, and they told me when I sat down with them and I talked to them about like plans for today, I said, I've got this great plan for Jason. I said, I told PennDOT to go out and paint lines.
It must have.
I said, great practical joke. Let's see how it goes. I feel vindicated.